Ok, mãe, vamos falar. Como é que a mãe aprendeu a falar inglês?
A ver o Big Bird and soap operas.
So a mãe viu Sesame Street?
Sesame Street
E...
and soap operas. And
It's okay. A mãe pode ser soap operas.
operas, yeah.
E era importante para a gente, para a Ana e eu aprender a falar português?
Era.
Porquê?
Não só por vocês saberem a vossa língua de onde vocês começaram, mas também porque quando iam visitar a vossa família lá em Portugal, eu tinha muita pena dos teus avós não poderem falar com vocês. Por isso era muito importante que vocês falassem português.
E agora eu sei, porque quando a gente foi lá este verão, e o Mason também teve pena que ele não podia comunicar com
as pessoas, com os
a
familiares.
nossa família em português, mas a gente tem muita sorte porque eles falam inglês. So, a gente tivemos sorte assim.
Yeah.
E os problemas que a mãe e o daddy encontramos estar aqui na América sem falar inglês.
Não era muito fácil, não. Mas eu, como gosto muito de falar, tive que aprender inglês de qualquer maneira.
Mas eu lembro-me também do daddy contar aquela história do Ira Grossman's.
Yeah.
E não vamos ter a palavra. E comprar aquela coisa
uma folha de
daquilo,
sheet rock.
E o homem a fazer pouco do daddy a ser assim.
E o daddy disse para eles: ou bem ou mal, eu falo duas línguas e tu só falas uma.
Yeah.
Okay. Eu também tive, quando cheguei aqui a esta terra, tinha muito medo das trovoadas. E estas trovoadas aqui, naquele tempo quando eu cheguei aqui, eram muito grandes, muito barulhentas, muito assustadoras. E eu tinha um medo e fui para uma vizinha. Ninguém estava em casa, eu fui para a casa de uma vizinha e pedi a ela se me podia lá sentar, mas com um inglês que eu não estava aqui há dias. E como eu não sabia inglês, eu disse para ela: eu tenho medo.
Mas ela sabia o que a mãe estava a dizer. Mas a mãe disse: eu tenho medo em inglês ou português?
Em português.
Em português. E ela percebeu.
O nome dela era Joyce. Era uma nice senhora.
Okay. Muito obrigada, mãe.
Muito obrigada. Okay.
Because English is our first language, it would not be hard for you to listen to another person who speaks English and write down the words that person uttered. The speech would be perceived as being divided into discrete units. However, the recorded message was not delivered in English, but rather in Portuguese. When you try to determine the units in a language you don't speak or understand, the job of picking out meaningful units is a challenge. It is difficult because the physical speech stream is continuous. People don't pause between words. This is important for us, teachers, to remember about our ELs. In the recorded message, the student who hears or speaks Portuguese would understand the conversation. My school's academic coach had a conversation with her mom about how she learned English. At the beginning of the conversation, you may have heard her say the words soap opera and Big Bird. Well, that is how she learned some English, by watching soap operas and Sesame Street. Also, she was a seamstress, and at one of her jobs, her boss promised to teach her one English word a day. If she worked for the whole year, then she would know 365 words. It worked because eventually she opened up her own business as a tailor. She did need a business partner to communicate with customers. Then over time, she successfully ran the business by herself. The Portuguese language took centuries to develop into what is now referred to as modern-day Portuguese. Like many languages, Portuguese is comprised of many indigenous languages. It is Latin-based, but incorporates many indigenous languages. For example, when the Romans came to what is now Portugal, they obviously brought the Latin language with them. Latin then mixed in with the languages of the indigenous people, and the various local dialects of Latin became known as Vulgar Latin. Vulgar Latin then developed into modern-day Portuguese. Then, when the Portuguese went to Brazil, they, of course, continued to speak the Portuguese language. There, the Portuguese language mixed with the indigenous language of the people who lived in what is now Brazil, and that is why Brazilian Portuguese is different from the Portuguese spoken in Portugal. People associate language with culture. For example, right now in Spain, there is a movement of the Catalan people to separate from Spain, the Catalan language that had almost been erased and replaced with Spanish. For this reason, the people of Catalonia, which is located in the northeast Spain and includes Barcelona, want to make Catalan their official language. Because they want their own identity and language, they feel it's necessary to separate from Spain and create their own country. Countries think of language as their identity. We hope our PowerPoint will help you become a teacher who can describe, not prescribe, speech acts in the Portuguese language. We want to encourage teachers to take a descriptive approach to language study because prescriptive approaches to natural phenomena like language simply don't work. If a teacher has some linguistic knowledge of Portuguese, then he or she will have the knowledge base to determine how to approach topics like phonics, vocabulary, syntax, or spelling. The Portuguese writing system. Brazilian and European Portuguese developed separate writing systems after Brazil declared its independence from Portugal. To better organize and unify the language, both countries signed the Orthographic Agreement of 1990. This established a single orthography for both countries and ended the existence of two official orthographic norms, one in Brazil and another in the remaining Portuguese-speaking countries. The agreement's main goal was to standardize the 6 most spoken language in the world. The Portuguese written word was brought closer to the spoken word, creating a unified spelling and to be used in all Portuguese-speaking countries. However, this change has not been accepted by all because diversification in languages have a great deal to do with identity. It gets personal. Petitions calling for the suspension of the implementation are being evaluated by the National Assembly in Portugal. Many question the benefits for users who do not live in Brazil. For example, a school in Portugal received a huge donation of books for its library, but they were all trash because they featured 4 different spellings. Some were traditional, some were Portuguese spelling, and some were Brazilian spelling. The standard Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese writing system are based on the Latin alphabet with 26 letters. However, the Portuguese language only had 23 letters until 2009. Then the letters K, W, and Y were added. Though the agreement was signed in 1990, the implementation only began in 2009. Official documents from public institutions started to be written exclusively according to the new rules in May of 2012. And in school, the rules have been in place since 2011. Some fun facts about the Portuguese language. Portuguese was officially declared a language in 1290. Portuguese is the 6th most common language in the world and has a presence on almost all of the continents. It's the official language of 9 countries. Only 5% of the Portuguese speakers live in Portugal. It is the fastest growing European language in the world, behind English. It's heavily influenced by Arabic, and its longest word has 29 letters, and it means in a very unconstitutional way. And this is somewhat related to how people feel about what is happening to the Portuguese language and its writing system.
In this next part of our presentation, we are going to analyze the linguistic features of Portuguese and compare it to the linguistic features of English to understand any differences ELs may encounter while learning English as a second language when Portuguese was their first language. The first linguistic feature we are going to discuss is phonology. Phonology is the organization of sounds within a language and how the sounds come together in speech. So the first difference between Portuguese and English is Portuguese is a syllable time language, which means all syllables take about the same time to pronounce. While in English, it's a stress time language, meaning that the stressed syllables are spoken at approximately regular intervals, while the unstressed syllables are shortened. This may cause some difficulties for ELs because it may be more difficult for them to get the correct intonation or rise and fall of their voice when they're speaking. The second difference in phonology between Portuguese and English is that there are a lot fewer sounds in Portuguese. There's only 9 vowel sounds, 6 diphthong sounds, 19 consonant sounds, and a lot fewer consonant clusters. And compared to English, that's a lot fewer sounds in general. And this is going to create or have a lot of difficulties for ELs. And some of these difficulties include a lot of pronunciation difficulties, meaning they may have difficulties hearing minimal pairings, like with the words rich and reach, where the vowel sounds are the only different sounds they hear. They may be unable to hear the unstressed vowel at the end of the words, and the differences between diphthongs, like in the words here and hair. Also, they may include vowel sounds before, between, or after, they may see the word straps when saying straps and adding that vowel sound at the beginning. And they may be unable to distinguish between similar consonant sounds, like the sounds for P and B. Additionally, they may substitute the sound high for the letter I or the sound we use for I. And they may have difficulties with the different TH sounds. The next linguistic feature we are going to discuss is morphology. And morphology is the study of how words are formed. In Portuguese and English, the academic vocab has many shared Latin roots, so there's a lot of cognates. But in the social vocab, they have less overlap. And so students may struggle more with learning the day-to-day language or BICS than compared to the academic language or CALPS. Also, since there's shared roots, there's going to be some false cognates which may cause difficulties for students or may trick students while they're learning English. So for example, in Portuguese, the word parentes means relatives, but it's very similar and sounds very similar to the word parents, which has a little bit of a different meaning and would be a false cognate. The other difference between Portuguese and English with morphology is that Portuguese is a phonetic language, meaning it follows the rules of pronunciation, and the words are pronounced the way that they look. But in English, it's not a phonetic language, meaning that many of the words are not pronounced phonetically, or they're not pronounced the way they look or follow those rules. So students whose first language is a phonetic language like Portuguese may have difficulties with spelling words they first hear and pronouncing words they first see written when learning English because it doesn't follow those phonetic spelling rules. The next linguistic feature we are going to discuss is syntax, and there are many differences between Portuguese and English that may cause English language learners whose first language is Portuguese to have some difficulties. So one difference in Portuguese is that the sentence structure is similar to English, but Portuguese sentence structure is a little bit more flexible. In Portuguese, questions are created through the intonation or that rise and fall of your voices to signify when there's a question. While in English, we have specific words or verbs that are acting as auxiliary or modal verbs at the beginning of a sentence to signify a question. So students may have trouble creating questions since in English we have very specific words, or we change how the word is used to create a question, while in Portuguese they just change how they use their voice. So English language learners whose first language is Portuguese, their questions may sound more like statements, which may cause confusion when speaking in English. The next difference is prepositions. So in Portuguese, there is less prepositions than in English, and that can cause some difficulties in sentence structure. And also in Portuguese, there is no direct translation between some of the Portuguese prepositions and English prepositions. So students may have trouble explaining where objects are since there are no direct translation for certain prepositions in Portuguese. Also, word order in Portuguese differs from English. So like I said, Portuguese is a more flexible language, so students may have trouble at first getting the correct word order when translating into English. For example, in Portuguese, nouns come before adjectives. So an example would be, in English we would say a beautiful dress, while in Portuguese it would be dress beautiful. Pronouns also are different in Portuguese and English. So in Portuguese, the pronoun agrees with the item, while in English, the possessive pronoun agrees with the subject of the sentence, or the subject that possesses. So for example, she's having lunch with his brother would be what is translated in Portuguese, since lunch is a masculine noun in Portuguese. So the pronoun would agree with the noun lunch. While in English, we would say she's having lunch with her brother, since the pronoun is agreeing with the subject of the sentence. Also in Portuguese, they may drop personal pronouns in phrases like I told her. So in Portuguese, it would be I told. The differences in pronouns can cause some confusion in sentences that include possession. So when students translate from Portuguese to English, there may be some confusion with those pronouns. Last, with syntax, students may have trouble with tense choice. So Portuguese has simple past, present perfect, and past perfect tense forms. And Portuguese speakers may struggle to choose the correct tense when talking about the future. Less advanced Ls may have trouble determining the correct present tense as well. So for example, an L may say, he has a bath instead of he is having a bath. The next linguistic feature we're going to discuss is semantics. And semantics is the study of meaning of language. So in Portuguese, they have gendered nouns, meaning the noun is either masculine or feminine, while in English, the nouns do not have any gender. So when nouns are gendered, it affects the way students will view the object or view the noun. So the objects that are more masculine will have more masculine attributes in the student's mind, while feminine nouns will have more feminine attributes. So gendered nouns will affect the way a Portuguese student views and makes connection to words as they learn English, since this vocab has a cultural perspective attached to it. Also, like we already mentioned, there's going to be some false cognates between Portuguese and English, but some of the false cognates may have a negative connotation in English or in Portuguese. So in English and Portuguese, there are some words that may have different connotations connected with them. So for example, the word abuse is a false cognate to the Portuguese word abusar, or to use frequently. Abuse in English has the negative connotation, while abusar, or use frequently in Portuguese, has a neutral connotation. And this may cause some confusion with Portuguese L's as they're learning English because they don't have the connotation or the feelings attached to some of the words that we have in English. Also, in Portuguese, there's only one word for the words why and because, and that word is porque. L's may struggle to choose between why and because in creating sentences because they only have one word for those two words in Portuguese. So they may create a sentence like he did not come why he was tired instead of he did not come because he was tired. Just like the word porque, there are also words in Portuguese where there is one word, while in English, we can use two words for it. So for example, in Portuguese, there's only one word for the word to rob. But in English, we can use multiple words to mean to rob. So we can use to rob or to steal. This can cause some confusion for students as they learn English because there are more than one word for the Portuguese meanings. Also, in Portuguese, the word ficar can cause some confusion when they are learning English. Ficar has many different uses, so it can mean to stay, but it can also refer to the change of a person's state, as in to remain, to grow, or to turn, or to become. Students may say he waited so long that he remained furious, instead of saying he waited so long that he became furious, since the Portuguese word ficar can be translated so many ways in English. The next linguistic feature we're going to discuss is pragmatics. Pragmatics refers to the rules that we should follow when we are talking and how language is created with context. Pragmatics is so closely tied to the cultural norms of a culture since it relates to the context of a language. And because of this, we're going to discuss pragmatics more in the next session of this presentation. But in general, Portuguese pragmatics is a more formal communication style until a relationship is established. So at first, individual greetings are very reserved at first, using eye contact, a handshake, and a proper greeting. Adults will maintain eye contact while children will not maintain eye contact with adults. And titles and surnames are always used. Once that relationship is established, greetings will become more informal and may include a hug or a kiss on the cheek, and first names will be used. But in the United States, greetings normally include a handshake, which is similar to Portuguese, and a brief, polite exchange of how are you. When introduced, children use titles and surnames while adults do not. One difference or difficulty that L's may struggle with when learning English is they may struggle to maintain eye contact with the teacher, since this is seen as a sign of disrespect in Portuguese, even though in English it's meant to show respect. Next, we are going to discuss discourse varieties. Discourse refers to the language and social aspects that a certain group of people use. Portuguese has multiple discourse varieties. Portuguese varies from mainland Portugal to the Azores Islands to Brazil. The main difference between these three varieties of Portuguese is that the accent placed on vowels differs, as does the pronunciation of words. There is also differences in vocabulary. For example, train in Brazilian Portuguese is translated to trem, while European Portuguese uses the word comboio. The accents between the two are different as well. Brazilian Portuguese is more phonetically pleasing because it uses open vowels. Additionally, Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese vary with formal and informal speech. Você can be used in most situations in Brazil to address people, which moves closer to the classless universal you in English. So Brazilian Portuguese is less formal than European Portuguese. European Portuguese only uses tu to address people in informal settings. Confusing tu for você in Portuguese or in European Portuguese or in Portugal will seem rude and impolite. It is important to keep which type of Portuguese L's speak in mind when they're learning English, because there are differences between European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese. Also, Portuguese academic discourse differs from English academic discourse. According to studies, there are two main types of Portuguese academic discourse. It's modern and traditional. Modern academic discourse is the same in Portuguese as it is in English. On the other hand, traditional academic discourse was popular in the Portuguese language until recently. Traditional academic discourse uses forms of persuasion, like the use of figures of speech, emotive language, and literary devices, instead of logical reasoning and evidence-supported claims, like English academic discourse. Older L students who already have their own academic discourse or way of writing and speaking in the academic setting may struggle to understand the English academic discourse, which values explanations in a transparent and objective fashion, as well as clarity, concision, and the rational argument. Also, written discourse of Portuguese differs from the English written discourse. The days of the week are not capitalized in Portuguese, while seasons are, which is the opposite in English. Also, nationalities are not normally capitalized either. Commas are not used to separate dates, which is all different from the English written discourse. L's will need explicit teaching of written discourse in English when they are starting to learn English when their first language is Portuguese.
Now we are going to talk about cultural norms and classroom implications for both the Portuguese and English language. Communication rules. I'm now going to discuss communication rules in both the Portuguese and English language. It is common for native Portuguese speakers to communicate in a louder volume. This loud volume is used for everyday speech, so that means when talking to family, when talking in a business, when talking to friends, etc. Whereas in English, when a louder volume is used, it's typically associated with anger or some other type of intense emotion, and it has mainly many negative connotations associated with the volume. In Portuguese, speakers will often not take turns when talking to one another. They can be quick to get off topic and to interject their own thoughts and opinions into a conversation. Whereas in the other side in English, for English speakers, not taking turns is often considered rude and disrespectful. Implications in the classroom. An implication in the classroom for L students is that they might talk in a louder tone of voice and in a higher pitch than other students in the classroom. A tip or strategy to help with this would be to explicitly go over appropriate volume levels for different modes of working or playing. It would be important to go over what the appropriate volume level looks like and sounds like when talking to one person, a small table, independent work, or even outside voice. The teacher should model this, as well as the students practicing it. So again, explicitly teaching this. I would also recommend some type of visual aid that would be able to be up in the classroom in order to reinforce the volume levels after they've been explicitly taught. A specific example that I currently use in the classroom are tap lights with images and labels to remind students what voice level they should be using in the classroom at specific times after the levels have been taught and practiced. So for example, on the image on this slide, you can see an example of the visuals that might be used to associate the volume levels. And that tap light, again, would help to show the student what voice level they should be using rather than just saying it and expecting all the students to understand. Nonverbal behavior. Portuguese speakers, when communicating, will often stand in very close proximity to one another and use a lot of physical touch in order to express emotions. This can be seen with hands on shoulders, kisses on cheeks, hugs, etc. Whereas in English, when communicating, we often use a metaphor known as personal bubble. The term personal bubble is used to indicate that when communicating with someone, you're not supposed to stand in too close of a proximity, or in other words, get in that person's bubble space. When communicating, Portuguese adults will always have direct eye contact with one another to show a sign of respect. We see this as well in the English language. However, the main difference is that Portuguese children are not supposed to make eye contact with adults. It is seen as a sign of disrespect to their elders. This includes parents, adults in the business world, teachers, etc. Whereas in English, children are supposed to make eye contact with all adults in order to signify respect. Implications in the classroom. In terms of nonverbal communication impacts for the classroom, one of the biggest differences between the Portuguese and English language is eye contact. As I previously mentioned, Portuguese children see it as a sign of disrespect to make eye contact with adults, including their teacher, whereas in English, not making eye contact with adults is considered a sign of disrespect. Teachers are often known to communicate with a lot of nonverbal eye contact. We give students the look, and this look's often used to signify a student to either quiet down, stop engaging in an unexpected behavior, all while the teacher continues to teach. So, in the classroom, it would be helpful for Portuguese students to develop a rapport with their teacher. To do this, the teacher might start a daily greeting with students every morning. He or she would stand outside the classroom door and make sure to individually greet each student with eye contact and some form of handshake, fist bump, high five. This lets students practice eye contact as well as creating a community for students to feel more comfortable and safe in. Another possible classroom implication is proximity when communicating. Children might stand in a closer proximity to adults and other peers than English speakers. Again, as previously mentioned, in Portuguese, it's considered rude if one were to take a step back to gain more space when communicating. So to help with this in the classroom, a teacher could create some visual spacing areas. For example, when standing in line, the teacher could have circles or dots on the floor where each student stands so they're not on top of each other. I know that not only younger students could benefit from this, but older students too. The teacher would also be able to do this visual spatial area when sitting on a mat or a rug. And even for table space, teachers could be able to section off areas on tables with colorful tape, reminding each student to stay in his or her area. And these are all kind of scaffolding tools that could be removed as the year progresses, if need be. Underlying norms and values evidenced by communication. Family values are extremely important in the Portuguese culture. Extended family are all closely related and interact on a daily basis. Extended family might include cousins, uncles, aunts, great-grandparents, parents, and children, all living and interacting with each other. So while the Portuguese language and culture favors the we, they are more of a collectivist culture, whereas the English language and culture features more of an I and is individualistic. English language and culture also typically has closer connections with direct family, mom, dad, children, rather than the extended family. In Portuguese, family relationships take precedence over friends, romantic relationships, and businesses. Portuguese speakers also attempt to avoid any form of conflict, as group consensus and harmony is considered to be a top priority. Therefore, Portuguese speakers will often avoid the word no when disagreeing and use a vague phrase like, well, maybe, rather than that direct and abrupt no. Portuguese culture is also a very hierarchical and patriarchal society. There are many differences in regards to superiors and subordinates when it comes to business, as well as generational differences between the young and the elderly. For example, superiors, when communicating, will go by a title according to their profession. So often elders are addressed as senor or senora, and this includes teachers, or professor, professora, which directly translates to teacher. While in the English language and culture, this is similar. We use Mr. and Mrs. when speaking formally, but we don't refer to a teacher as teacher, but rather Miss Doe, Mrs. Black, etc. Also, as Lexi previously mentioned, it's considered disrespectful for younger Portuguese children to make direct eye contact with adults, and it is expected for children to display obedient behavior towards their elders at all times. Implications in the classroom. In Portuguese culture, as I previously mentioned, teachers are seen as authoritative figures, and this means that Portuguese parents will often stay uninvolved from their children's education because of this. They will defer to the teacher in regards to all educational decisions. However, this is not viewed that Portuguese parents care less about their child's education whatsoever, just that they understand that the teacher is an expert in this area and they don't see themselves as needing to be involved. This is different than in English, where some parents are considered too involved nowadays and overprotective, and so they have gained a phrase called a helicopter parent. The implication in the classroom is that parents of Portuguese Ls might be less involved in their child's education. Teachers know that it often takes a strong relationship with the parents to help students succeed. You're a team. So a helpful tip or strategy is to reach out and form a connection as soon as possible. Don't wait. You can send home a survey in the Portuguese language. You can ask them to come in for a meeting with an interpreter if need be, just so the parents can start to feel comfortable with you and you can build a comfortable connection so that they know that they are on a team with you, the teacher.